The woman in your life will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you.
Hello everybody and welcome to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine B. Holtz and I'm your host. And as always, I am just thrilled about today's show. I have a very, very special guest with me by the name of Colonel Ann Wright, who is a retired U.S. Army colonel and also U.S. diplomat. And one of the most amazing women that I have met in my life, one who shows so much courage and so much commitment to the whole peace process and to making sure that the women and children of the world are safe. And this, I have such admiration for Colonel Wright. I can't even express it, so I'm just so honored to be able to interview her today, particularly since this will be the first program celebrating the idea of Women's History Month. As most of my viewers, I hope, know that the History Project actually started here in Sonoma County by a dear friend of mine by the name of Molly McGregor. So all of March, we're celebrating women in history, and on March 8th is going to be Women's History Day. And I know that Colonel Wright has so many wonderful stories to tell you, particularly what she's going to be doing on March 8th, which is Women's History Day. Oh, it's so exciting when you start thinking about it, that we actually have a day and we actually have honored our history, which is so beautiful and so inspiring. Also during the month, I will be having an interview that I will be running with another dear friend of mine who happens to be an African-American woman by the name of Carlin Alexander, and we're going to be talking about Frances Harper, which is an unknown African-American woman who has had such impact on the women's movement. So look forward to that show. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest, Colonel Ann Wright. Colonel Wright, welcome to Women's Spaces.
Well, thank you, Elaine. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Well, it's so exciting to have you, and I just want to tell my viewers just a little bit about you, and also my listeners, because this is going to go on the radio on KBBF. Colonel Ann Wright is a former United States Army colonel and retired U.S. Department state official known for her outspoken opposition to the war in Iraq, which was really an amazing thing. She is noted for having been one of the three State Department officials to publicly resign in direct protest of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. She also, and as most of my viewers and listeners know, I interviewed Cynthia Mckinney, and Colonel Wright was actually on the boat with Cynthia Mckinney when they did Mari Mara was part of the Gaza Flotilla. Am I correct?
Well, that's right. Cynthia and I both have been on the various boats that have tried to break the naval blockade, the Israeli naval blockade of Gaza, and Cynthia was on one boat that was rammed by the Israeli military. I was on the actual flotilla that had 6 ships in it, including the Mavi Marmara, on which 9 people were assassinated by the Israeli Defense Forces, including 1 American citizen, and 50 other people were wounded by them. Every one of the boats was viciously attacked and people beaten up and tasered, but it was on the Mavi Marmara where 9 people were murdered.
Oh my goodness! And you were actually on the boat when that happened?
I was on the boat right next to it. I saw the commandos start firing on that boat. We saw a lot of it until our captain of our boat said we're going to move away from it and we're going to try to take some of the Israeli patrol boats with us. And when they finally caught up with us, that's when they assaulted our boat. They didn't kill anybody, but they beat a lot of people up on it.
Oh my goodness, Colonel Wright, that is amazing to me that you were even involved in something like that.
Well, I think it's very important that one use one's background, and mine, having been in the U.S. military and as a U.S. diplomat, to raise my voice on these issues of social justice and war and peace. And I've certainly been a part of the war machine for most of my life, and now I want to be a part of a nonviolent peace machine.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because here we are. It's Women's History Month, and March 8th is going to be Women's History Day. And you're one of the women, I believe, that's on the forefront, particularly with the military. So why don't you tell us a little bit, what was your motivation when you first decided that you were going to go into the military, and what were some of your challenges?
Well, like most people that join the military, they don't join it because they want to go kill anyone. They join it for a variety of reasons. Some join it because of family situations at home they want to get out of. Others join it because they need a job, they need some sort of training. I joined it because I grew up in the state of Arkansas and I wanted to get out of Arkansas. I wanted to go travel, and when you think back in the 60s, the jobs that were open for women were school teachers, nurses, secretaries, and homemakers. All good and honorable, but I didn't want to do any of them. I wanted to go travel, and when the military recruiter came through Northwest Arkansas, primarily to nab the guys to go to Vietnam, he said to me, well, you're a woman, you're not a nurse, so you wouldn't have to go to Vietnam. And I said, well, is there a way, can you get me out of Arkansas? And he went, well, sure, we could do that. So I signed up. I thought anybody could march, anybody can wear a uniform for 2 years, and if he can get me out of Arkansas, I'm going.
Oh, how interesting.
So that was the only reason I joined. And then I stayed 29 years, though.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. What were some of, you were one of the, Vietnam, when you go all the way back there, you were definitely, a forerunner for women coming into actually achieving the level of colonel, my goodness. What were some of the challenges that you had that you can remember way back when?
Well, remembering is the problem. No. Well, when I joined, less than 1% of the military forces were women. Now we have 17% of the U.S. military forces are women. So from the time I went in until now, there's been a dramatic change in how women are able to work within the military and the types of jobs that they are allowed to go into. When I went in, you were pretty much in administrative jobs. There was plenty of harassment. Any minority, 1% minority in anything, always gets harassed. And in a male-dominated society like the military was, there was plenty of harassment of women. As we now know, there was more than just harassment. One of the real tragic things that we've now really found out a lot of information about the incidents of sexual assault and rape in the military, where the statistics that the Department of Defense itself are giving us is that 1 in 3 women are going to be sexually assaulted or raped during the time they're in the military. And most women are only in the military for 4 to 6 years. It's an epidemic that's going on in the U.S. military. The prosecution of those being accused of being sexual predators is very low. And we're trying to get our Congress to step in to really put the hammer down on the military to stop this. These criminal acts are being committed by our own military members.
Well, I had a very interesting woman on my show by the name of Kate Weber, who lives locally here, who's working very hard. She was actually in the military and was raped, and I was stunned at how difficult it is to get any kind of prosecution. And all they're asking is for the prosecutors to be outside the military so there's some sort of fairness. It's just stunning to me that these things happen. Well, that's quite an adventure that you had then. And how did you overcome the harassment? What was your attitude? Where did you get your power and your strength?
Well, you have to make sure that you are checking all the check marks, so to speak, in the military. You have to make sure that you are in very good physical shape. You have to be able to pass all the physical training things, the runs, the sit-ups, the push-ups, those sorts of things. One might think, well, that's the least of what you ought to be prepared for in the military, but from the military perspective, that's one of the most critical parts of it. And for women, it has been a difficult challenge because most women haven't trained themselves to that level. And so once you get in the military, you really have to be very exercise oriented. And then once you're doing your just main job, you've got to be better than the guys. You've got to make sure that there's no reason for criticism in the job performance you have, because that will be, of course, used against you, and much more than if a guy can't quite do a job perfectly, okay, well, we got plenty of guys. But if a woman doesn't do it perfectly, then the criticism really starts raining down on them.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that. And one of the things that I'm kind of wrestling with now personally, and I could ask you, is the idea of women being on the battlefield. That in some levels, it disturbs me a little bit, because when I think of women, I think of them as the birthers, the bringing forth of life. How do you feel about that, and what are some of your thoughts about women particularly I realize it's an evolution, because it's more of an acceptance that they are part of the military, but what is your thought on that?
Well, when I first joined the military, there was a combat exclusion policy that women were not to be in the battlefield, that they were to have positions that were behind the front lines. But from Vietnam on, we found that there really weren't any front lines. Wherever you were going to be within a battle area. And from Gulf War I, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, we see that the war is all around. Everybody's in the battle zone. And this arbitrary construct of women not being allowed to be on the battlefield by the types of jobs that they were being assigned to has fallen apart, because everyone is a part of it. So even though the Congress has now said that women can be a part of combat operations, they're about 4 decades too late in that. Women have always been a part of it. And it's a very brutal, brutal thing when you are in major combat. When women are suffering in the same manner that men are, the post-traumatic stress of what they've seen, what they've done. They too have been in IED explosions. They have traumatic brain injuries. They are committing suicide because they cannot cope with what they've seen or what they've done. And you add on to it the issue of sexual assault and rape in the military. So a woman that joins the military is not in for an easy time, nor is a man that joins the military.
So they have to really be aware of that.
Yes.
You know, it's really interesting what you're saying about that they've been on the battlefield all along. I just think on so many levels that war has become very outdated. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I've really concluded that war is nothing but killing one another. And sometimes one of the things that I have found out in talking to some of the returning vets, that sometimes when they're in the battle itself, they don't even know why they're doing it. It becomes very confused and very blurred. And I think there's, with the PTSD, I think it's more of a moral thing. It's like all of a sudden you come home and you say, oh my goodness, what was I involved in? Would you kind of agree with that? Or?
Sure. I think a lot of military folks, they are ordered into a situation. They're not sure of exactly why their unit is involved in whatever it is. Some of them may, from the very beginning, even have doubts about why our military is being used in, for example, a war in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And we've had many service members who have refused to go to these wars, who say, I did not sign up to go kill Afghans or Iraqis, or the rationale that you are giving us, the American people, is wrong for invading and occupying Iraq. I mean, that's why I resigned from the U.S. government over the exact same thing. At the time, I was a U.S. diplomat, a civilian, so I could resign. However, had I been in the U.S. military at the time and had those same reservations, I would not have been able to resign, and I would have had to take on the military, such as Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who refused to deploy to Iraq. As hundreds of our military members have refused, most of whom have been court-martialed and have served time in jail for refusing to go to wars they didn't believe in.
Amazing, amazing, Colonel Wright. It's just amazing. It really is. Well, let's talk a little bit about your evolution here. I mean, you brought that up. So you got to the rank of colonel. I mean, how many women actually have that title?
Not many. Although there are a lot more than when I first joined the military. When I first joined back in the late 60s, there was a cap on the level to which women could rise, and you could only rise to actually lieutenant colonel. There were only two colonels in every military service, one for example, the Women's Army Corps, and one for the Army Nurse Corps. So anybody else that stayed in for 30 years, the top that they could go was lieutenant colonel. Now we have 4-star generals that are women. not many of them, but we have 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars, and we have a lot of colonels. So it's actually in proportion to the rise in the overall number of women in the military.
Well, forgive my ignorance. So is the colonel one of the highest ranks, and then you go into the 4 stars, or is it colonel the top rank? I'm sorry.
No, colonel is the rank right below general officer, and then there are 4 stars of general officers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the top being the 4. So I was not a general officer, but I was very proud to be a colonel.
Well, so at the time, were you probably one of the first women that actually achieved that title then?
Well, not really. I mean, over the years, during World War II, we had
right.
Hundreds of thousands of women that were in our military, and then there was the drawdown after World War II, and build up during the Korean War, back down, and then Vietnam, more women were going in. But it wasn't until 1978 that they raised the cap, or eliminated the cap, so that women could be general officers, and that more than just 2 women per service could be colonels.
Well, that's such interesting information. I mean, we really don't know the insights into the Army or the structure, but that's amazing. But I still think it's amazing that you made it to colonel at that particular time. And now let's move into the diplomatic corps that you were part of. So you went from the U.S. Army. Did you actually retire from it and then go into the diplomatic corps, or was that kind of part of it? How did that work?
Well, I request release from active duty in order to go into the diplomatic corps. I did stay in the reserves during the Army reserves during part of the time that I was in the diplomatic corps, and then I actually retired from the Army reserves in 1996. But in the diplomatic corps, which I joined in 1987, I served in U.S. embassies in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone. I helped, in Micronesia, I helped reopen the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan in December of 2001, and stayed there for about 5 months, and then went on to what turned out to be my last assignment, which was the Deputy Ambassador of the U.S. Embassy in Mongolia. And then it was there in March of 2003 that I resigned from the government in opposition to the war in Iraq.
Well, one thing I have to say, you definitely got your dream of traveling, for heaven's sakes, all the different places you went. Well, you know what I'd like to do now? First of all, I'm going to identify us. My name is Elaine B. Holtz. I'm the host here of Women's Spaces on your C Media, public access television, and also being recorded and listened to on KBBF 89.1 FM. And I'm talking with Colonel Ann Wright, who is a retired U.S. Army colonel and also a retired U.S. Diplomat, and we're just about going to get into her diplomatic experience. But what I want to do is, Colonel Wright, if you don't mind, I want to share a little picture with my viewers. And here's Colonel Wright right here, and it's so interesting because I see you. How old were you about there? Do you know?
Oh, this was in 1983. I was a part of the intervention forces in Grenada.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yes, that was 1983.
And there you are on the other side, with your new uniform on, Courage to Resist. Tell me a little bit about how those changes evolved.
Well, after I resigned from the government over the Iraq War, then as a civilian, I could speak about my experiences in the government. And I'd worked for 8 different presidential administrations, starting with Lyndon Johnson back during the Vietnam War. So I, like the American people, we've seen the whole array of policies of those 8 presidential administrations. I started speaking out about the Iraq War. Of course, that's what I resigned over, so I was willing to speak about that. And as time went on, after the first year that I had resigned, more and more organizations started asking me to speak and speak on other things. And by that time, we were finding out more about things that concerned me, including what was going on in Guantanamo, what was going on in Abu Ghraib, torture, extraordinary rendition, eavesdropping. That we even during the Bush administration, there was a lot of information coming out about the U.S. Listening in to conversations. Of course, now we know with revelations of Ed Snowden, that was just the tip of the iceberg. So the evolution for me was to be speaking out as a private citizen, but using the background that I have as a long-time U.S. government employee.
So you felt, so what you did is you used your position and what I would say status to protest something and then decided to resign. What was that like for you emotionally? I mean, just the idea, here you are, a woman, you rose to such high ranks, also now you're part of the diplomatic corps. What was that like emotionally for you to make that big of a decision? I mean, to me, when I think about it, it's just overwhelming. So what was the process that you went through to do that, and what was your core belief system that really motivated you?
Well, it was a big decision. Here I was going, first I didn't realize that I was ultimately going to resign. I had expressed my concerns about this, what appeared to be the United States going to war in Iraq. I had, behind the scenes, sent a dissent channel cable to Colin Powell, who was the Secretary of State, laying out my concerns about this, all of the rhetoric we were getting out of Washington about the dangers that the Saddam Hussein regime had toward the international community and the need to use military force to take him out. So I had sent a dissent channel cable to them in Washington, and that was after waking up in the middle of the night thinking, what in the world is going on? Why are we going to invade and occupy Iraq? I mean, that's an awfully big step, and it's after 10 years after Gulf War I, where in the 10-year period the U.S. had 2 no-fly zones over Iraq. We had used over 400,000 aircraft sorties to take out all sorts of military installations and equipment and government facilities. There was a quarantine around Iraq for 10 years where the international community was monitoring everything that went into that country. There had been UN weapons inspectors that had been into Iraq who had looked for weapons, found some, destroyed them. So how in the world was the Bush administration, what were they talking about, weapons of mass destruction?
So it sounds like to me that at the time it wasn't necessarily that you were anti-war. You were looking at what was going on and saying to yourself it didn't make sense as far as your background went. But how did you get to the point where not only did you feel that this was wrong, but now you became anti-war? You said war is not the answer. I mean, what was that process like for you?
Well, as a diplomat, one would think that you were trying to work on non-war resolution of problems. And in fact, most diplomats try that, but it seems like our national level government is much more likely to use war than trying to keep these diplomats going and pushing them to resolve this thing non-violently.
You know, you just gave me a thought, Colonel Wright. In other words, diplomat is someone supposed to bring diplomacy,
yes,
a way to communicate, a way to talk, and a way to solve problems, and you're representing the United States. I never thought of diplomat that way.
That's right.
So go ahead and continue.
That's exactly what the job is. Your job is to try to resolve issues non-violently. And if they can't be resolved non-violently, then one of the next steps could be military operations. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but because there can be a period of time when diplomats perhaps don't engage with whomever is you're trying to resolve the problems. There can be a period where nothing is happening. It doesn't necessarily mean that once the diplomatic negotiations stop, that you immediately have to go into military operations. Doesn't mean that at all. But it seems like that is the way the United States has been approaching things over the last decade and a half.
Do you think that your thinking, the way you were thinking and the way you were processing, anything that the fact that you're a woman and the way women see things, do you think that played into it at all?
Well, I don't know. I think my background, having worked for 8 presidents, and I didn't agree with every single policy of 8 presidents. There were plenty of them that I held my nose to, and I didn't want to have anything to do with them. And because there are so many policies of every administration, usually you can find a way that you can move away from those policies you don't agree with and work on something that you do agree with. But there were plenty of policies during that 30 years that other people have told me now, why did it take you so long to resign? Didn't you disagree with, well, it was the war in Vietnam, that's when I joined. Not that I was particularly for the war, but I just wanted to get out of Arkansas, which may seem like a lame excuse for joining the military, but that's what it was all about.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about your experience like coming into Vietnam. I personally, on a personal note, I was not anti-war when I first got into school. Mm-hmm. And what happened is I was a journalism major, and they had this group come in called the Wheelchair Brigade. And my editor said, I know you're not against the war. All this protest is going on around. And I'm a first generation American. My grandparents were born in Europe. So, they escaped pogroms. And so the United States, you kissed the ground that when you came here. And so I go and I interview these 50, this Wheelchair Brigade, and it's 50 Vietnam vets who are paraplegics telling me the war is no good and telling me they're not getting good care. I walked in, pro-war, I walked out, all of a sudden my whole world, because I had no idea what war was about. Mm-hmm. I thought of war as rah. I didn't think of war being taking the lives of young people and also are crippling them. So, and I thought that changed me. So do you think that were some of the things maybe that changed you when you start seeing the what really war was all about and what the military was about?
Oh, I knew what it was. I mean, I'd been a part of it for 29 years. It wasn't that it was a sudden revelation.
Oh,
I knew it. I was saying that this war on Iraq, I mean, I just come from Afghanistan. I'd seen what the U.S. was doing there. There were CIA paramilitary there. There were U.S. military that were there. I mean, I know the war situation. But the decision of the Bush administration to invade and occupy an oil-rich Arab Muslim country that had nothing to do with 9/11 was not a part of Al-Qaeda. It just didn't make a bit of sense to me. And so I resigned on that.
Well, it sounds like it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like you had other awarenesses, but this was too much already. It's time to move on. Well, I have some more pictures because it's so interesting to me that here you are a colonel in the U.S. Army. Then you're a United States diplomat, so you're working with all these different issues. And now all of a sudden, retired, and now you're center stage protesting the war and coming out. And I want to show my viewers two more pictures here, which I think are very wonderful. There you are speaking. And there you are with one of our favorite groups, Code Pink.
Yes.
I know that Code Pink is really very, very close to your heart. And when I look at that, and I think when I look at the other pictures of you being part of the Army, it is stunning to me, the changes that you made. So tell us, how did you end up becoming an anti-war activist and then hooking up with Code Pink? Because that, to me, is the most fascinating thing.
Well, once you've given up your career over an issue such as the war in Iraq, then others who have similar concerns about the war in Iraq start getting in touch with you, to include Code Pink Women for Peace, Veterans for Peace. Anytime the peace movement can find somebody that's been in the military or been a diplomat that's willing to speak out on these issues, they want to make sure that they give you the opportunity and the platform to do it. So Code Pink was Johnny on the spot, as was Veterans for Peace, to say, please, will you come and speak at our events? Will you talk about your experiences in the Army and in the Foreign Service? And now you're speaking on the need for the U.S. government to stop this war machine.
Well, how did that feel that is, to me, is such an amazing transition, but it also shows, in my mind, your strength as a woman, and your strength and conviction of really believing that you were serving for a purpose, and when that purpose was kind of really not looking the way it should look, you wanted to go outside of it. So how did that feel all of a sudden, to go back to your first time you gave a presentation?
Oh, I tell you, there have been I've been nervous in many a situation, like the first time that you are speaking to a large audience and you're there, speaking, really criticizing your government, criticizing it very, very strongly. And many people that I've known from my former lives in the military and the State Department have been kind of amazed at how active I've become and my willingness to very, very publicly criticize the administrations. Bush administration first, now the Obama administration. I mean, I'm an equal opportunity critic of policies that I believe are wrong for our government. So many former government employees are not so willing to speak out, and so for me it's taken a while. I've been nervous in various situations, and kind of taking a really deep breath of, okay, here we go. Who knows what's going to happen after this? But at least I'm being true to my conscience, that when I feel that there's something that I need to criticize, that I'm willing to do it.
Well, Colonel Wright, I have to say this. What you said, true to your conscience. I mean, there's something in, I believe in the goodness of human beings. I really do. I think we are innately good. When you look at a baby, they're just so precious. We were all those babies. And I think we're taught this hate, we're taught this fear, we're taught all these things. And my question to you is, when you talk about your conscience, what did you mean by that? I mean, the reason that I'm asking these questions is because there's so many people out there who don't get involved, who kind of sit back and they're very apathetic. And, Martin Luther King said it so beautifully, the day that I stop living is when I stop speaking out for what I believe in. And that's what I see that you did. But still, at the same point, what do you think where that consciousness came? I mean, how did that evolve for you?
Well, I think we always have a conscience, whether or not we listen to it. And sometimes we allow things like these pesky things called jobs get in the way of our conscience. And whether you're working for the government or a corporation or an educational institution, there may be situations that arise that what's going on is not right, that something just isn't right. And sometimes it may be even criminal acts being committed by somebody that's in that organization, that corporation, that educational institution, that government. And then it's whether you act on your conscience or you act on that feeling in the pit of your stomach that something's wrong. And trying to hold true to your convictions. I mean, there were times that I knew the U.S. government was doing things that were wrong, but I didn't resign on them until that Iraq war. So it's not like I have always acted on my conscience. If I had done that, I would probably have resigned decades before. But for a lot of people, I think for most people, we'll build up constructs for us that if you want to have a job, being a whistleblower or resigning over conscience is not an easy thing in terms of just the moral decision and then what you're going to face afterwards. Virtually all the whistleblowers that we have of this last decade have suffered terribly. Many of them have been put in jail. Many of them are in exile. It's not easy to act on your conscience. Corporations fire people who disagree with them. Educational institutions fire professors. The government throws them out, puts them in jail if you dare to expose criminal acts. Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning in jail right now, 35 years. Ed Snowden, NSA whistleblower, in exile in Moscow. Men and women who disagreed with the war in Iraq who are in the military who have spent anywhere from 6 months to 18 months in jail for it. So acting on your conscience, no matter whether you're in the government, corporate life, educational life, or wherever, sometimes comes with a very high price.
Well, I agree with you 100%. It does when you speak out. It's very, very scary. I know in my lifetime I've had a few incidents where I have stood up and all of a sudden, you almost feel like you're going to pass out because you think, wait a minute, what am I saying? What are the consequences going to be? But then on the other hand, at least you can live with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at least you know you have followed what your heart and your soul and your conscience was telling you. So thank you so much for sharing, because that is very deep, you know, and that's why it's so difficult for people. That's why on my show I try to tell, particularly my women viewers, start slow, write letters to the editor, get involved, you know, volunteer somewhere. Start slow to start helping. But I still have to say my heart and my hat is off to you, because the decision you made and what you've done for so many people and waking us up, it's just been marvelous. Well, let's get into today's world, because I know there's so much happening. One of the things that you told me about that I was shocked to find out about, that there's been a boat that's been traveling around the world for the past 30 years that none of us know about, that about 1,000 people every year go, and it's called the Voyage of the Peace Boat, and it's something that the Japanese people started, and I understand that you're going to be part of that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it is the Peace Boat, and it is run by a Japanese organization that takes people all around the world on 2 around-the-world voyages each year. It's a 1,000-person boat, and I was asked to go on a portion of the voyage, which was a voyage of friendship into Northeast Asia. There were 500 Japanese and 500 South Koreans that were on this boat. And the reason for the voyage in Northeast Asia was because in Japan there's been a lot of hate speech and actions against Koreans, ethnic Koreans who have lived in Japan for generations. And as in many countries of the world, to include our own, there are extremists who don't like people that don't look like them, the immigrants. Well, in Japan, there's been this rash of hate speech. So the Peace Boat said, in between these round-the-world voyages, let's have a voyage of friendship in Northeast Asia. So the boat had 500 Japanese on it. We sailed up to South Korea, picked up 500 Koreans, then went down to Taiwan, then to Okinawa, then to China. And on board were both Japanese and South Koreans who were talking about experiences, about issues, social justice issues for both of the countries. I had been asked to come on to talk about the issue of U.S. militarism in Northeast Asia. You know, here it is 65 years after World War II, and the United States has a large number of military bases in Japan and in South Korea. And in fact, one base that's now being built on the pristine island of Jeju Island, 100 miles south of the South Korean mainland, for Navy destroyers that house the Aegis missile defense system, the U.S. missile defense system, and a part of this wonderful pristine island being torn up for another naval base. And this should be of concern to your viewers, because Santa Rosa is the sister city to Jeju Island. And right now at the Sonoma Historical Museum is a remarkable exhibition about Jeju Island and the history of other militarism in their island, where the Syngman Rhee government in 1948 sent their military with the acknowledgement of the U.S. military. The U.S. military government was still there, and massacred 25,000 of the people on this Jeju Island.
Wow.
Yeah. So I would encourage your viewers and listeners to go before May to see this remarkable exhibition.
Well, you know, I just want to remind them that's at the Sonoma County Museum, and it's right adjacent to Macy's downtown, so it's easy to get to. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is very, very interesting. And also the idea of friendship, opening to friendship. Well, you know, we're coming to the end of our interview, and I know that there's something very special you're going to be doing. You're going to be, this will air after the fact, but you're going to be at the Santa Rosa JC tomorrow night to speaking to everybody, and I want to thank you so much for coming, making part of your speaking engagements as part of Sonoma County. It's just an absolute honor to have you here. But I know that after this, you're going to board a plane, and you're going on another, what I would call, very serious adventure with another flotilla, if I'm correct. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about this, and then we'll start wrapping up. I know this is a long interview, but you know, there's just so much to cover, Colonel Wright, and I'm just, like I said, I'm just so honored to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, after I speak in Berkeley on Sunday, then I'll be heading out to the airport to fly to Egypt. and I will be joining an international women's delegation that will go from Cairo, Egypt, into Gaza. And we will be in Gaza for International Women's Day in solidarity with the women in Gaza. I was there 5 years ago for International Women's Day with a group of 60 women, and this time we'll have a delegation of 15 from the United States and 85 from countries around the world.
Can I just ask you a quick question? You know, when you go on these flotillas, do you have to get a passport, a visa? How does the United States allow this to happen, or is there some resistance to you going?
Well, this is not a flotilla as such. We're not going by
Okay.
boat. We're going to be going overland across the northern Sinai.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you have to you get a visa for Egypt in the airport in Cairo, and then you have to negotiate with the Egyptian government for them to let you through their side of the border into Gaza. We've been invited by non-governmental agencies in Gaza and also by the UN Relief and Works Agency in Gaza to make this trip. The United States government does not want us to go. They have warnings for American citizens actually to go into Egypt, but most definitely into Gaza. And on the flotillas, the boats that I have been on that have attempted to go into Gaza, there have been specific U.S. government very harsh statements and warnings, essentially threatening us if we try to go in, but we do it anyway.
Well, that feisty woman in you, for heaven's sake. But you know, I think that's what happens once you get involved. You know, there's an old saying, there's an old line in Bobby McGee, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing ain't worth nothing unless it's free, you know, and this is your exhibiting your freedom, which is very important. Now, on this particular mission, I have two questions I'd like to ask you real quickly, is why you chose International Women's Day to land or to participate, and what is your basic message that you're bringing, if you could answer that.
Well, we want to be there in solidarity with the women of Gaza. You know, the people of Gaza are under such pressure, threat. And the state of Israel has isolated Gaza, quarantined both land and sea for it. And particularly this last year, there have been a lot of Israeli attacks there. There have been environmental issues of massive rainstorms that have come in, and because they are unable to get construction materials in and repair parts for things like the sewage plant, the water plant, the electrical plant, the life in Gaza is miserable, which is what the Israeli state wants. They want it to be miserable. And we're going there in solidarity with the women and children to say, we haven't forgotten you.
Well, you know, I got to tell you something that I did on Women's Spaces. I found out about the art show that they brought from the children of Gaza. And I found out that they were trying to not show it, and I decided I got a whole clip and put it on Women's Spaces and talked about it. And the thing that I would hope as women that we really pay attention to is the things that happen, how they affect the children and how they affect the women. And when they affect the women and children, they're affecting future generations, and we don't realize that. Not only do they create hate, but they create such fear and such anxiety that your life can't even be normal. I know one night I got really scared. I started shaking, something that happened with my husband, and all of a sudden I thought, what would it be like in a country if a bomb came floating in your kitchen while you're eating dinner? I mean, all these different things that are happening, so it's very, very important. So you're saying that you're going in solidarity with the women in Gaza. How many people will end up going at the gathering, do you know?
Well, yes, we have 100 international women that will be going into Gaza, and we'll be meeting with hundreds, if not thousands, of Gaza women over the 8 days that we will be there.
Well, I envy you. I would love
please
to.
come with us.
I would love to. I would, and I just know, you know, my heart is there, and just being able to tell the women in this county of what is happening, because we don't hear this on the news. Well, you know, Colonel Wright, the time has just gone by so fast, and there's so many other areas that we could talk about. Is there anything that we've missed that you would like to share, or anything that's important? And also, after you share that, anything that you'd like to say to our viewing audience? I just have you look at that camera. Any message you want to give, this is Women's Spaces. Any kind of encouragement or inspiration you'd like to give our women viewers?
Thank you. I'll just mention that earlier this year, in January, I was in Geneva, Switzerland at the United Nations for the Syrian peace talks, round 2. And we were there with an international several international organizations that have been helping Syrian women try to get to the peace table. Most peace negotiations are just with the boys with the guns, and very seldom do you even have one woman that's represented on either side. So this time, a lot of organizations have come together to say, for peace talks, you need to have the women represented. And if you guys are not going to ask women to be on your delegations, why not have a third lane on this? Why not have women as a delegation? Women as a delegation. So over the last 3 months, we've been working with various groups in Syria to have Syrian women dangerously try to get out of there. And 50 of them met in Geneva, talked for a week, picked 10 of theirs, which cover all the political spectrum. But more importantly, they're all humanitarians. They want this violence to end so that the killing will end. And I was there to try to help them get, as our top goal, to be a part of the negotiations themselves. Well, that didn't happen. The next level was, how about get observer status for this group of 10? Well, that didn't happen this time. But now this idea has been broached that you have 3-party talks, that you have the boys with the guns on both sides and the women as kind of the arbiters of all this. So we're not giving up on it, but it was really important to be there in solidarity with the women of Syria.
Well, I got to tell you something, in solidarity with all the women in the world. This year for Mother's Day, I want to bring back the old concept of Mother's Day, to end wars, to bring peace on earth, and to start working together. Well, I'm just curious, what did it feel like all of a sudden standing up for all these women? I mean, here you come from the U.S. Army, becoming a colonel, going into the diplomatic corps, retiring, becoming a public speaker, and now here you are with this group of women. What did that feel like for you?
Well, it's exhilarating to be able to work in a manner which you hope is going to be helping these women. I mean, I must say, when I was in the government, I was hoping I was helping people, but I think I know that there's more help that's being given now through the efforts that I am embarking on in cooperation with so many wonderful organizations.
Well, just remember, everything in life happens for your greatest good. And if you had not had all the Army and the diplomat and all the experiences and all the knowledge you have, you couldn't even speak out the way you're speaking out. So it's all perfect the way it worked for you. And I just pray that more people could follow their conscience. Even though I know it's so hard and it's a big risk, it's still so... To me, it sounds so rich. I think your life is a lot richer now than it's ever been. Well, listen, now just turn over the camera. Any message that you would like to give our women viewers, just anything from the heart, please be my guest. Take about 30 seconds.
Well, that women are the heart and soul of the families and our communities. And have heart, be generous with your time, with your family and your colleagues, your friends, and follow your conscience. Thank you.
Well, Colonel Ann Wright, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on Women's Spaces, and thank you for all women and all children for what you're doing, and of course the men too. But like you said, the boys with the guns sit at the negotiating table. We need the women with the heart and the conscience and the care and the concern for the children to be at the table. So thank you so much, and I want to wish you a much successful trip, and be safe, and look forward to hearing you at the Santa Rosa JC.
Thank you.
Well, to my viewers and listeners, what an interview that was. I'm telling you, this has been one of the most exciting moments of my life. I mean, to be able to sit in conversation, not only just talk about military and talk about some of the issues that are going on in our country and across the globe, but also to kind of look at how there are ways to have peace, what it's like to follow your conscience, how important it is for women to come to the table. and to speak. After all, we are the ones, you know, it's very interesting, as most of my viewers and listeners know, I'm very involved with the Andy Lopez situation, and we've developed this organization or this group called Mothers in White. Now, why are we calling it Mothers in White? There's 3 reasons. The first reason, we all have mothers. So that means that men can join us to stand up for their mothers. Second level, all women are potential mothers. So that brings all the women that don't have children or don't care to have children because they have other ideas. And then, of course, we have the mothers and the grandmothers. So that's why we call it Mothers in White. And why do we use white? Number one, it was Andy Lopez's favorite color, but white is the sign of peace. You know, whenever there's a war going on and you want to stop, you don't want to be shot at, you wave a white flag, and that means you want peace. You want to sit down, you want to negotiate, you want to talk. So white is a very, very important color for all of us. Actually, white incorporates all colors, so that's what's so interesting about it. And lastly, you know, there's a lot to do in this world. And what I try to do is encourage, particularly my women viewers, to get off your duff and do something for peace. Do something small. Write a letter to the editor. Go to the Peace Press. There's all kinds of nonprofits that you can volunteer your time. Every once in a while, read the paper. And if there's a march or something that you don't like, go out. Even if you don't want to march, just be a participate and cheer the people on. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do to get involved. But the most important thing, like Colonel Ann Wright said, follow your conscience. Ask yourself, you know there's something wrong. We know in the pit of our stomach when they're cutting food stamps, when they won't give us Medicare, when they're going and bombing and throwing drones all over the world. We know there's something wrong. We know it has to be made right. But it's not going to happen if we, the people, do not stand up and say, enough is enough. And if women stand up and say, stop killing our children, stop taking our husbands, stop taking our fathers, it's going to be a lot stronger world. Anyway, this is Elaine B. Holtz. I've been hosting Women's Spaces here at C Media, and also you will be listening to this on KBBF 89.1 FM. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching and listening, and also I encourage you to become a fan on Facebook. I have 301 fans. Oprah only has 20 million, but I'm moving up. I'm moving up the ladder. Become a fan on Facebook. If you know of anybody in the community that you feel is important, is doing some important work, please write me at elaine@womenspaces.com, and I'm very happy to consider it. Anyway, this is Elaine B. Holt with Women's Spaces saying thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching and listening, and I look forward to us being together the next time.
The woman in your life will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you. The woman in your life knows simply what is true. She knows a simple way to touch to make you whole now. In your life, will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the